Welcome to Module 2, Climate Change. During the readings for this module, I'd like you to take a look at where the scientific consensus actually is on climate change, what the role is the climate changing. I'd like you to take a look at the role of human actions in climate change, okay, and what is the scientific consensus on that. Take a look at where do the scientists actually disagree? Where are the controversies? You know, how much is being contributed by this human activity? How much is being contributed by that activity? And then reflect back on what the scientific consensus actually is as we go through this. Okay. After this video, there's a link to Undeniable Facts. The CNN put this out. It was. That provides some bedrock observations. Okay, these are not things that we, these are not opinions. These are things that we have observed and measured. Okay. Overall, in the course, we want you to be a more skilled consumer of scientific information. And unfortunately, there's ways that science can be misused in our society, and we're going to go through quite a bit of them. In this particular one, we're going to go through something called science denial. Okay, but let's just go over them in general. Okay, science fraud. Climate scientists will be accused of climate science fraud. Okay, that is the deliberate falsification of data in order to support a particular position. That's usually found out through the peer review process. For instance, at one point there was this conclusion that climate change had suddenly halted, and people looked back through peer review, looked back through the process, and they found that the Soviet Union, Russia, rather than publishing their current climate data, had simply republished the data from the year before, and that had obvious effects of saying, hey, there's no climate change. Siberia is a big place. The Russia is a huge country, and so that was a huge chunk of the data there. And whether that was a mistake or science fraud or just plain laziness, who knows? But it was found through the peer review process, and that's scientific fraud. Pseudoscience. That's not just some guy wearing a funny hat and and a white beard and throwing around trying to sell snake oil on late night TV. That's really anybody who is using the trappings of science in order to gain to accrue for themselves some of the prestige that science has accrued in our society. We have accrued many benefits from the work of scientists and engineers and doctors, the process of science, and people would like to have that prestige for their own practices, whether they're using the scientific process or not. The way to tell the difference between pseudoscience and science is the knowledge that they are presenting. What they are presenting as knowledge, is it subject to revision? And if it is not, it's not science. Okay. If it is revealed knowledge, say from some holy scripture, that is not subject to revision, and it's not science. If it's from some astrology, okay? Astrology is not science. It's not subject to revision. All right, there's no amount of scientific evidence that's going to convince somebody who believes in astrology that the practice has no scientific basis or can't be proven. Okay, they're simply going to go back and look for and cherry pick other evidence to find that. Might be otherwise very fine people. Just, it's not science. Please don't claim it's science. The last one would be anti-science. This would be And the model, I'm going to present you with a model for this one. This would be the actions of the tobacco industry during the years before we acknowledged as a society that smoking causes cancer. If you want, you can go to University of California, Davis, where they have an archive for all of the internal documents that had to be released during civil suits from the tobacco industry, and the analysis there, and they'll talk to you about the various tactics. They have pages that talk about the various tactics that were used to prevent the emergence of a societal consensus on tobacco and cancer, and thus preventing a legislative or regulatory approach, even though a scientific consensus had already been reached, or preventing a scientific consensus. And in some cases it was deliberate scientific fraud. They would play with the definitions of who was and wasn't a smoker, and like for instance they would say, well, the definition of who was a recipient of secondhand smoke. If you live in a house with somebody who was a smoker, you were a recipient of secondhand smoke, and they would classify those people as smokers rather than secondhand smokers, and thus obfuscating the data on the harm of secondhand smoke. Okay, so we have fraud, scientific fraud, we have pseudoscience, and we have anti-science. And you'll have to make your own decisions on these things. I mean, that's kind of what we mean by making or allowing you to become a more informed and skilled consumer of scientific information. Okay? And you can draw your own conclusions from that. Okay? Good luck and have fun with it.